I married the perfect man, and it was my biggest mistake. He was perfect. He was kind. He was financially stable. My parents adored him, and he loved me in a way I thought only happened in the movies. Everyone told me how lucky I was, and I believed them until I realized that marrying the perfect man was the biggest mistake of my life, and I was going to be the one to break his heart. Before I met Leo, my heart was a battlefield. It was a casualty of a war I never saw coming. The man before him, the one I really thought was my soulmate, had left a crater where my trust used to be. It was the kind of heartbreak that changes you on a cellular level, the kind that makes you look at love not as a comfort, but as a threat. I can still remember nights spent on my cold bathroom floor, making a promise to myself. Never again. Never again would I let my happiness hinge on the wild unpredictability of passion. Never again would I be that vulnerable, that stupid. So I rebuilt, but I didn't heal. I fortified. I built walls around my heart and decided that from now on, logic would be in charge, not my emotions. My new goal in life was simple: safety, security, predictability. And then Leo walked into my life. He wasn't a lightning strike. He was a sunrise, gentle, warm, and completely reliable. He was a successful architect with a 5-year plan. He called his mom every Sunday, and he listened, I mean really listened, when I spoke. He was the human equivalent of a weighted blanket. On our first date, he saw I was cold and just draped his jacket over my shoulders without a word. On our third, he brought me a tiny potted succulent because I'd mentioned offhand that I always kill flowers. My friends were thrilled. My parents were relieved. "He's a good man, Emma," my mom would say, her voice full of a hope that I just couldn't feel. That's what really matters. And on paper, I knew she was right. It was like he ticked every box on a checklist I didn't even know I had. Stable career? Check. Kind heart? Check. Wants a family? Check. He was the perfect antidote to the chaos that nearly broke me. He was the promise of a life where I wouldn't be in a constant, emotional freefall. So when he got down on one knee, a year later, right in the living room of the beautiful house he hoped we'd buy together, I said yes. My heart wasn't bursting with love, but my mind was calm. It felt less like a proposal and more like signing a peace treaty with my own past. I was doing everything you're supposed to do, choosing the good, stable man, building a future on concrete instead of the shifting sands of infatuation. I convinced myself that affection would grow, that the quiet contentment he offered was just a more mature kind of love. I told myself I was lucky. I repeated it over and over until it almost felt true. We got married on a perfect fall day. The leaves were gold and red, the air was crisp, and when Leo looked at me, his adoration felt like a physical weight. We bought the house from the brochure, the one with the big bay window on the quiet tree-lined street. Leo filled it with furniture he had built himself, and with a relentless, almost suffocating kindness. His love was in every detail. It was in the coffee he'd make me every single morning, exactly how I liked it, without me ever having to ask. It was in the way he'd fill my car with gas if he noticed it was low. It was the little notes he'd leave on my pillow. "Have a great day, my love." Every single gesture was proof of how good he was, and every single one felt like another brick in the wall of my guilt. Because I felt nothing. I was living in a beautiful museum of life, and I was the only visitor, completely unimpressed. I felt like an actor, playing a part, reciting lines I didn't believe. I'd smile at his jokes, hold his hand when we walked through the park, and say I love you too on autopilot. But inside, there was just a deep, profound silence, an emptiness that his perfect love couldn't touch. In fact, his perfection just made the emptiness feel bigger. The conflict inside me was agonizing. Here was this man who gave me everything I was told I should want, and all I felt was this low, humming anxiety. It was the anxiety of being a fraud, terrified he'd be found out. The guilt was constant. It's one thing to feel guilty for hurting someone, but I felt guilty for a crime I was committing every single day just by being there, by accepting a love I couldn't give back. That guilt is what kept me there, long after I knew it was over in my heart. But the worst part was the loneliness. You'd think living with someone who adores you would be the opposite of lonely, but it's a very specific kind of isolation. It's the loneliness of being completely misunderstood, not because he was cruel, but because he saw a version of me that just wasn't real. He was in love with the happy, content woman he thought he'd married. He had no idea he was sharing a bed with a ghost. He'd hug me, and I'd feel my body tense up. His warmth just made me feel colder. His presence only amplified my absence. I was a stranger in my own home, in my own skin, and to the man who slept next to me every night. He deserved passion. He deserved a woman who looked at him with that same fire he had in his eyes for me. And every day I stayed, every day I played the part, I was stealing that from him. It was a quiet, slow-motion betrayal, wrapped up in the package of a perfect marriage. Before I tell you about the moment everything started to unravel, I just want to take a second. If any of this is resonating with you, if you've ever felt trapped between what you should want and what your heart is actually telling you, or if you understand this feeling of being lonely in a relationship, hit that subscribe button and join our community. We talk about the hard stuff here, the messy, complicated truths. You're not alone in this. It wasn't one big, dramatic explosion. It was more like a slow shattering, a series of tiny cracks spreading across the flawless life we'd built. I'd been shoving down a fundamental truth for years, and my soul was starting to suffocate. The cracks started as small, almost unnoticeable moments of clarity. I remember we were at a dinner party. Our friends, Sarah and Mark, were telling a story about a disastrous camping trip. It was a total mess, forgotten tent poles, burnt food, a ridiculous fight over a map. They were telling the story while bickering and laughing at themselves, interrupting each other, and in their chaos, in their imperfection, I saw a spark, a vibrant, messy, undeniable connection. They were a team, even when they were arguing. I sat there next to my perfect, agreeable husband, and I was hit with a wave of the most intense jealousy I have ever felt. I wanted the mess. I wanted to have a stupid argument over a map. I wanted the kind of passion that fuels both fights and makeups. I looked at Leo, who was just smiling politely, and it hit me. We never fought. We never did anything with that much energy. Our life was a placid lake, and I was desperate for a hurricane. That night, a question I had read somewhere online popped into my head. If your relationship stayed exactly as it is today forever, would that be enough? The answer was a silent, violent scream inside me. No, absolutely not. From then on, the facade started to crumble. The constant pretending began to wear me down, physically and mentally. I was exhausted all the time. That low-grade anxiety became my constant companion, and I was wrapped in this heavy cloak of unhappiness I just couldn't shake. My self-esteem, which I'd tried so hard to anchor to the stable marriage, was in pieces. How could I respect myself when I was living such a huge lie? I felt unlovable for not being able to love him, and like a monster for not appreciating this wonderful man. I felt myself disappearing. The woman I was before all the heartbreak, the one who was passionate and opinionated and a little bit wild, she was gone. In her place was this hollowed-out Stepford wife version of myself, just going through the motions. It felt like a slow, emotional death. I'd look in the mirror and not recognize the woman staring back. She looked tired. She looked sad. She looked like a complete stranger. And the worst part? A resentment started to build. It was completely unfair to Leo, but it was there. I resented his kindness because it felt like a cage. I resented his happiness because it just highlighted my own misery. Our communication, always pleasant but shallow, basically stopped. I didn't bother sharing things about my day anymore. It took too much energy to fake the enthusiasm. The house got quieter. The silence between us grew heavier, filled with everything I was too scared to say. I knew I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I could either let myself fade away into this beige, comfortable life, or I could do something about it. I had to find a way to hear my own voice again, a voice that had been drowned out by everyone else's shoulds and my own unhappiness. Late one night, unable to sleep, I was scrolling on my laptop and saw a listing for a 10-week creative writing course at a local community college. It was on Tuesday nights. It felt totally frivolous, a small, selfish act in a life built on a selfless lie. The old me, the pre-heartbreak me, had loved to write. I realized I hadn't written a single creative thing since meeting Leo. I signed up right then, before I could talk myself out of it. That first Tuesday, I felt a nervous excitement I hadn't felt in years. I walked into a classroom full of strangers, a retired mailman, a kid in a punk band, a frantic new mom. We were all there for the same reason, to put the stories inside of us onto paper. The professor gave us our first prompt. Write about a place you know, but from the perspective of a stranger. And so, I wrote about my own home. I wrote about the gleaming hardwood floors that were always cold on bare feet. I wrote about the perfect plump sofa that no one ever really curled up on. I wrote about the spotless kitchen, clean, because we rarely cooked with the kind of joyful messiness that makes a meal an event. I described the man who lived there as a kind, gentle curator who tended to the house, and the woman in it like they were priceless artifacts in a museum. And as I wrote, for the first time in years, I was telling the truth. It all just poured out of me, flood of buried feelings and observations. When I finished writing, my hand was cramping and the page was stained with tears. That class became my lifeline. It was the one place I didn't have to pretend. It was me, taking back a piece of myself. Week after week, I wrote. I wrote about the ghost in the house. I wrote about the girl who made a promise on a bathroom floor. I wrote about the difference between being safe and being happy. It was how I started to heal, how I processed the truth before I was strong enough to say it out loud. With every story, I felt a little bit of the real Emma coming back. I was finding my voice again, one sentence at a time. And I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating, that I was going to have to use it. That voice was about to break my perfect husband's heart, but it was also about to save my own life. Choosing the right moment felt impossible. There's really no good time to drop a bomb on someone's life. I carried the words I'd practiced in my car around with me for a week, and they felt like stones in my stomach. The guilt was a constant companion, whispering about how horrible I was. Every time Leo smiled at me, my resolve crumbled. Finally, on a Thursday night, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The thought of continuing the lie had become worse than the confrontation I was dreading. We'd just finished a quiet dinner. The TV was off. The only sounds were the hum of the fridge and the frantic pounding of my own heart. He was clearing the plates when he said, "You seem quiet tonight. Is everything okay?" And there it was, my opening, the point of no return. "Leo," I started, my voice cracking immediately. "Can we sit down? I need to talk to you." His expression shifted from casual concern to a focused stillness. He sat on the sofa across from me, his hands on his knees, giving me his full, undivided attention. Just like always, it made everything so much harder. "I don't know how to say this," I began, staring at a loose thread on the rug. "And I need you to hear me on this first. This is not your fault. You're the kindest, best man I have ever known. You have been a perfect husband." He just watched me, his face unreadable, waiting. "This is my fault," I continued, the words feeling clumsy and cruel. "For years, I haven't been honest, with you or with myself. I married you because I was scared and broken, and you were safe. You were everything good and stable. I kept telling myself that I would learn to love you, that the love would grow. I really, really waited for it." I finally made myself look at him. His confusion was hardening into a look of dawning horror. "It never did, Leo," I whispered. The words hung in the air, toxic and irreversible. "I love you, but I'm not in love with you. I never have been. And living like this, pretending to be the wife you deserve, it's breaking me. I feel like a ghost. And it isn't fair to you. You deserve someone who feels that lightning for you. You deserve a love that's real and passionate and equal, and I can't give that to you." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. He didn't yell. He didn't get angry. He just shattered. I watched the life drain from his face. His shoulders slumped, and he dropped his head into his hands. A small, strangled sound came out of his throat, the sound of a heart breaking. "So, this was all a lie?" he asked, his voice muffled. "The last 5 years?" "It wasn't a lie," I said, my own tears starting to fall. "It was a hope, a desperate hope that I was wrong about what I needed, that this could be enough. But it isn't. And staying with you out of guilt is the biggest lie of all. It would be crueler to let this go on for years than to tell you the truth right now." He looked up, and his eyes were filled with a pain so deep it looked like a physical wound. "I don't understand," he said, his voice raw. "I did everything right. I gave you everything." "You did," I sobbed. "You did everything right. I'm the one who did everything wrong. I married you for the wrong reasons, and I let you believe in something that wasn't real. And I am so, so sorry, Leo. I will be sorry for the rest of my life for the pain I'm causing you." The conversation went on for hours, circling the same awful truths. There was nothing I could say to defend myself, no explanation that would soften the blow. I had built our life on a faulty foundation, and now we were both standing in the rubble. By the end of the night, he looked at me, not with love, but like I was a complete stranger. The perfect world we had built was gone, and I was the one holding the sledgehammer. The days that followed were an exercise in quiet devastation. The house, which once felt like a silent museum, now felt like a tomb. We moved around each other like ghosts, the air thick with grief and blame. The logistics of separating calling lawyers, talking about the mortgage, became a weirdly welcome distraction. They were sterile tasks that shielded us from the gaping emotional wound between us. Leo moved out 2 weeks later. I helped him pack. We barely spoke. What was there left to say? Watching him drive away, the finality of it all hit me. The house was empty. The silence was absolute, and I was completely, terrifyingly alone. The judgment from others was swift. My parents were heartbroken and confused. "But he was so good to you?" was the sentence I heard over and over. Some friends pulled away, unable to understand why I would throw away a perfect marriage. I became a cautionary tale, the woman who didn't know how good she had it. The isolation was a heavy price to pay for my freedom, and there was so much grief. I grieved for the man I had hurt so badly. I grieved for his family, who had treated me like a daughter. And strangely, I grieved for the perfect life I was never meant to have. It was the death of a dream, even if it was a dream that was slowly killing me. For a long time, guilt was my only companion. I'd lie awake at night, wondering if I had made a horrible, irreversible mistake. It's been 2 years. I live in a small apartment across town now. The paint is peeling in a few spots and the floors creak, but it's mine. Money is tighter, and my social circle is smaller. But for the first time in almost a decade, I can breathe. The heavy cloak of unhappiness and lies is gone. I'm no longer an actor in my own life. What I learned through all this is that you can't build a life on a foundation of fear. You can't use another person as a shield to hide from your own past. Kindness is critical, but it's not a substitute for a real connection. And stability is a wonderful thing, but it can never replace real happiness. Being brutally honest in that last conversation was a painful but necessary act of respect for both of us. Leo deserved to be free from my lie, free to find someone who could love him with her whole heart, not just with her grateful mind. And I deserved to be free to become myself again. Letting him go was the kindest thing I ever did for him, and the bravest thing I ever did for myself. It was never about finding someone better. It was about finding myself, even if it meant dismantling a life that looked perfect from the outside. The path to happiness isn't always comfortable or safe. Sometimes you have to be the villain in someone else's story so you can finally be the hero in your own. Have you ever had to choose between security and your own happiness? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one.